Yaroslav Jensen never expected his life to change because of a dog. It was just another exhausting day. He had spent the morning working a construction shift, then rushed home to pick up his 6-year-old son, Theo, from school. Bills were piling up, his car barely ran, and despite working himself to the bone, he still couldn't give Theo the life he deserved. But all thoughts of his struggles disappeared when he spotted the little golden retriever darting through traffic, its leash dragging behind it. "Hey, buddy. Where are you running off to?" Yaroslav muttered, dropping Theo's small hand as he dashed toward the frightened pup. The dog yelped, tail tucked, sprinting toward a busy intersection. Without thinking, Yaroslav lunged forward, managing to grab the leash just as a taxi screeched to a halt inches away from them. "Daddy," Theo gasped, eyes wide in horror. Yaroslav exhaled sharply, crouching to soothe the trembling dog. "You're lucky, little guy," he murmured, scratching behind its ears. A collar hung around its neck, engraved with a single word, Charlie. Theo knelt beside him, his tiny fingers combing through the retriever's fur. "Does he have a home?" Yaroslav checked the tag and found an address nearby. "Looks like it. Let's take him back." The Jensen apartment was barely holding together with flickering lights and a landlord who constantly threatened eviction. But for Theo, a dog was a grand adventure. Yaroslav, however, knew better than to get attached. They walked for 20 minutes before stopping in front of a towering glass building. Yaroslav frowned. This can't be right. The name on the building read Cassandra Jameson Enterprises. Before he could second-guess himself, the doors swung open and a woman burst through, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Charlie," she gasped, her voice frantic. The golden retriever perked up, barked happily, and wiggled free from Theo's grasp, bounding toward the woman. Yaroslav finally got a proper look at her. She was stunning, long, dark hair cascading in waves, striking green eyes sharp with intelligence and something else: relief. She wore an expensive navy blue dress, her presence commanding, effortlessly elegant. "You found him," she breathed, kneeling to embrace the dog. Yaroslav cleared his throat. "Yeah, he nearly got himself killed, ran straight into traffic." She looked up at him then, really looked at him. Her gaze flickered over his worn jeans, his dirt-streaked shirt, the exhaustion in his eyes. But instead of judgment, there was something else: curiosity. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I was terrified I lost him forever." Theo tugged on Yaroslav's sleeve. "Daddy saved him." The woman's lips parted slightly. "You're his father." "Yeah, Yaroslav Jensen, and this is Theo." She reached out and shook his hand, her grip firm, confident. "Cassandra Jameson." The name struck something in his memory. Of course, Jameson Enterprises. The woman standing before him wasn't just some random dog owner. She was the Cassandra Jameson, the CEO of one of the most powerful companies in the city, and he had just returned her dog like it was nothing. Cassandra glanced at Theo, then back at Yaroslav. "I owe you both. Let me repay you." Yaroslav shook his head. "Not necessary, just glad he's safe." Her brows furrowed. "At least let me take you both to dinner, a thank you." "We really don't, Daddy," Theo whispered, tugging at his sleeve. "Can we, please?" Yaroslav hesitated. He hadn't been able to take Theo anywhere nice in years. Cassandra smiled, as if sensing his internal battle. "I know a great place, just say yes," he exhaled. "Fine, but only because Theo wants it." Her grin widened. "I'll send a car for you both at 7. Yaroslav wasn't sure what he had just agreed to. But as he watched Cassandra walk away, Charlie happily trotting by her side, he had a strange feeling this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. Yaroslav wasn't sure what to expect when the car arrived that evening, but he certainly hadn't anticipated a sleek black-town car with a sharply dressed driver waiting outside his apartment building. Theo's eyes widened as he clutched onto Yaroslav's hand. "Daddy, is this for us?" The driver, a middle-aged man with a professional demeanor, nodded. "Miss Jameson sent me to pick you both up. Please step inside." Yaroslav hesitated. He wasn't used to this kind of luxury, but Theo was already tugging him forward, his excitement too palpable to ignore. With a resigned sigh, he opened the door and helped his son inside before sliding in himself. The interior was pristine, the leather seats smooth beneath his fingertips. Theo ran his hands over the armrest, marveling at the buttons and lights. "This is like those cars in the movies." Yaroslav chuckled at his son's enthusiasm, though his own nerves tightened with each passing block. He wasn't the type of man who dined in expensive restaurants, and he certainly wasn't the type to be meeting a woman like Cassandra Jameson for dinner. When they arrived, the driver opened the door for them, leading them toward a restaurant with gleaming chandeliers visible through the large glass windows. The moment they stepped inside, the scent of fresh herbs and seared meat filled the air, and the low hum of conversation surrounded them. A hostess greeted them with a polite smile. "Mr. Jensen," he nodded, adjusting the collar of his button-up shirt, one of the only decent ones he owned. "This way, please." As they followed her through the restaurant, Yaroslav spotted Cassandra already seated at a private table near the window. She had changed into a simple yet elegant black dress, her dark hair pulled back just enough to reveal the graceful line of her neck. She looked up when she saw them, her lips curving into something warm. "You made it," she said as they reached the table. Theo climbed onto his chair eagerly. "This place is fancy," Cassandra laughed, the sound light. "I'm glad you think so. I wasn't sure what kind of food you both liked, so I figured a little bit of everything wouldn't hurt." Yaroslav settled into his seat, feeling uncomfortably aware of how different he was from the other patrons, men in tailored suits, women in shimmering jewelry. He cleared his throat. "This wasn't necessary, you know." She tilted her head slightly. "Maybe not, but I wanted to do it anyway." A waiter appeared, pouring water into crystal glasses before handing them menus. Yaroslav glanced at the options, his stomach twisting at the prices. He could buy a week's worth of groceries for the cost of one entree here. Cassandra seemed to notice his hesitation. "Order whatever you want, it's my treat." Theo, oblivious to his father's discomfort, immediately pointed at the menu. "Can I get the pasta with the cheese?" Cassandra smiled. "Mac and cheese, absolutely." Yaroslav sighed and settled on a simple steak, though he had no idea how he would even begin to eat something so refined. Once the orders were placed, Cassandra leaned forward slightly. "So tell me about yourselves." Yaroslav met her gaze, unsure how much to reveal. "Not much to tell. I work in construction and Theo keeps me busy the rest of the time." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "And his mother?" His jaw tightened slightly. "She left when he was still a baby." Cassandra's expression softened. "That must have been tough." Yaroslav shrugged, focusing on his water glass. "I manage." There was a pause before Cassandra spoke again, her voice gentle. "Theo seems like a great kid." At that, Yaroslav's lips twitched into something close to a smile. "Yeah, he is." Theo, completely unaware of the weight behind their conversation, was happily coloring on the back of his menu with a set of crayons the waiter had provided. Cassandra watched him for a moment before turning back to Yaroslav. "You don't seem like the kind of man who asks for help." He exhaled slowly. "I don't." She rested her elbow on the table, her chin lightly touching her fingers. "But if help was offered," he met her gaze, something unreadable passing between them. "Depends on the offer." Their food arrived, interrupting the moment. Theo immediately dug into his mac and cheese with enthusiasm, while Yaroslav focused on his steak, relieved for the distraction. As the meal continued, the conversation grew easier. Cassandra told them about Charlie's mischievous habits, and Theo eagerly shared stories about his school projects. Yaroslav found himself relaxing, even laughing at a particularly animated tale from his son. When the plates were cleared and dessert was offered, Theo's eyes lit up at the sight of a chocolate cake being brought to the table. Cassandra chuckled at his excitement. "I think we have a chocolate lover here." Theo nodded vigorously, already reaching for his spoon. Yaroslav shook his head with amusement. "You might have just made his entire week." Cassandra's gaze flickered to Yaroslav. "I don't mind." For the first time that evening, Yaroslav allowed himself to really look at her, to see beyond the wealth, beyond the poised exterior. There was something genuine about her, something that didn't quite fit the image of a cold, calculating CEO. As Theo happily devoured his dessert, Cassandra leaned in slightly. "How about this? Since you won't let me repay you properly for finding Charlie, what if I make you a deal instead?" Yaroslav raised an eyebrow. "A deal," she nodded. "You said you work construction. My company is constantly involved in new projects. What if I offered you a job, something stable? Better pay." His body tensed immediately. I don't need charity. It's not charity, she countered smoothly. It's an opportunity, one that you've earned. He studied her carefully, searching for any sign of pity, but there was none, just a quiet, steady confidence. Theo, completely oblivious to the weight of the conversation, licked chocolate from his spoon and grinned. Daddy, that sounds cool. Yaroslav exhaled through his nose, rubbing the back of his neck. He wasn't a man who took handouts. But this wasn't a handout, was it? It was a chance. A real one. Finally, he met Cassandra's gaze. I'll think about it. Her lips curved slightly. That's all I ask. As the evening wrapped up and they stepped outside, the city lights casting a soft glow around them, Yaroslav found himself looking at Cassandra in a way he hadn't before. Maybe this wasn't just a dinner. Maybe it was the start of something else entirely. Yaroslav had barely set his toolbox down when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He wiped the sweat from his forehead before pulling it out, his brows pulling together as he saw the unfamiliar number. Answering cautiously, he pressed it to his ear. Yaroslav, came Cassandra's unmistakable voice. His grip on the phone tightened slightly. How did you get this number? A soft chuckle. I have my ways, he exhaled, glancing around the half-finished framework of the building site. He had spent the last few days debating her offer, but something about accepting a job from a woman like her felt unnatural, out of place. What do you need? He asked, keeping his tone even. I was just wondering if you'd made a decision, she said. I'm not one to pressure people, but I like to know where things stand. He glanced at the workers around him, the ones who had been doing this job for years, their hands rough, their backs aching. There was no stability here, no future. If I take the job, he said, choosing his words carefully, it's because I earned it, not because you feel like you owe me. I wouldn't have offered if I didn't think you could handle it, she replied smoothly. Would you like to come by my office tomorrow so we can discuss the details? His gut twisted at the idea of stepping into her world, but he forced himself to nod before realizing she couldn't see him. Fine, tomorrow. Good, she said, satisfaction laced in her voice. I'll see you then. The call ended, leaving him staring at his phone, wondering what exactly he had just agreed to. The next day, Yaroslav found himself standing in front of Jameson Enterprises, feeling entirely out of place. The lobby was pristine, all marble floors and high ceilings. Employees in crisp suits moved with purpose, barely sparing him a glance. The receptionist, a woman with sleek hair and an air of efficiency, greeted him with a polite nod. Mr. Jensen, he shifted his weight slightly. Yeah, Miss Jameson is expecting you, she said, pressing a button on her desk. Take the elevator to the top floor. He hesitated for a moment before stepping inside the gleaming doors. The ride up felt longer than it should have, his reflection in the polished walls reminding him just how different this place was from the world he knew. When the doors slid open, Cassandra was already waiting. She leaned against the edge of her desk, her outfit sharp and tailored, her expression unreadable. You're punctual. He stepped forward, his eyes scanning the vast office, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city. Figured if I was coming here, I might as well do it right. She gestured toward one of the chairs. Sit. He did, though he felt more like a man being sized up than a potential employee. I won't waste your time, she said, folding her arms. There's a new development site my company is working on. I need someone who understands construction but isn't afraid to ask the hard questions. Someone who won't just nod along when contractors cut corners. He frowned slightly. And you think that's me? I know it's you, she said simply. I did my research. He exhaled through his nose. Figures. She tilted her head slightly. Does that bother you? He met her gaze, steady and unwavering, not sure yet. A slow smile spread across her lips. Fair enough. They discussed the logistics, the pay, the expectations. It was more money than he had ever made in his life, enough to give Theo the kind of stability he deserved. When they finished, Cassandra leaned back slightly. So, are you in? He hesitated for only a second before nodding. Yeah. I'm in. For the first time since he met her, Cassandra looked almost pleased. Good, she said. Then let's get started. The transition into his new role was smoother than Yaroslav expected. He had assumed there would be resistance from the other workers, but Cassandra had made it clear that his position wasn't up for debate. She was precise in how she ran things, sharp in her decisions, and never hesitated to challenge anyone who tried to undermine her. It should have been intimidating, but instead, Yaroslav found himself admiring the way she carried herself. They spent more time together than he anticipated, going over blueprints, walking through sites, negotiating with contractors who thought they could pull one over on her. She never wavered, never backed down, and slowly, Yaroslav realized he wasn't just working for her. He was working with her. One evening, as they walked through one of the latest builds, Cassandra glanced at him. "You don't talk much about yourself," he shrugged. "Not much to say," she arched a brow. "I highly doubt that," he exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm a single dad trying to do right by my kid. That's about as complicated as it gets." Her expression softened slightly. "That's not simple at all." He hesitated before meeting her gaze. "And you, what's your story?" She let out a quiet breath, her eyes flickering toward the skyline. "People assume having money makes everything easier, but losing my parents young, inheriting this company when I wasn't ready. It hasn't been as effortless as people think." He studied her for a moment. "You ever think about walking away?" She smiled faintly. "Every day," he chuckled, "and yet here you are." "Here I am," she agreed. Something unspoken passed between them then, something that neither of them was ready to name. But it was there. And it wasn't going away. The evening air was warm as Yaroslav stood with Cassandra on the rooftop of the nearly completed high-rise. The city stretched out below them, glowing with the soft flicker of streetlights and headlights weaving through the roads. The wind stirred Cassandra's hair, a few strands escaping from the careful way she had styled it earlier. She didn't seem to notice. Her attention was entirely on him. They had spent the past few weeks working side by side, and somewhere along the way, everything had shifted. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It wasn't just about casual conversations between business meetings. There was something deeper beneath every glance, every lingering moment when their hands brushed against each other. Yaroslav exhaled, running a hand over his jaw, feeling the roughness of the stubble he hadn't bothered to shave that morning. "You ever get tired of it?" Cassandra tilted her head slightly. "Tired of what?" "The responsibility, the expectations, having to be the one in charge all the time." A quiet laugh escaped her, but there was no humor in it. "More often than I'd like to admit." He turned to face her fully, leaning against the railing. "Then why keep doing it?" Her gaze flickered downward, as if she were searching for an answer in the city below. "Because if I don't, someone else will. And they won't care about it the way I do." He studied her in the dim light, the way her expression softened when she wasn't wearing the armor of her title, when she wasn't the CEO of a massive company, but just a woman standing beside him in the night. "You care a lot more than you let on," he said. She let out a quiet breath. "That's the problem." Before he could respond, the rooftop door creaked open and Theo's small voice echoed through the space. "Daddy." "Cassandra." Yaroslav turned just as his son came bounding toward them, his curls bouncing with his hurried steps. Cassandra knelt as Charlie, her golden retriever, trotted happily at Theo's side. "I think Charlie likes me the best," Theo announced, scratching behind the dog's ears. Cassandra laughed, the sound lighter than it had been moments ago. "He definitely likes you more than my assistant. He growls at her every time she walks into my office." Theo grinned. "That means I win." Yaroslav shook his head with amusement. "You're not supposed to turn everything into a competition." Theo shrugged, entirely unbothered. "But I still won." Cassandra stood, brushing imaginary dust from her hands before glancing at Yaroslav. "You should let me take you both somewhere tomorrow, somewhere fun." Yaroslav raised a brow. "Like where?" She leaned in slightly, her voice teasing. "That's a surprise." Theo gasped dramatically. "I love surprises." Yaroslav sighed, knowing he was outnumbered. "Fine. But if this involves anything ridiculous like a private island, I'm walking back home." Cassandra placed a hand over her heart in mock offense. "You wound me. I was thinking something much simpler." Theo clapped his hands together. "We should definitely go." Yaroslav looked at Cassandra, the way the city lights reflected in her eyes, the way she was waiting for him to agree. And just like that, he knew there was no way he could say no. The next day, Yaroslav found himself at an amusement park, something he hadn't expected but somehow suited Cassandra perfectly. She was different here, away from the towering office buildings and endless meetings. She laughed more, her guard lowered as she raced Theo from one ride to the next. Yaroslav watched them from a distance as they stood in line for the carousel, Theo bouncing excitedly while Cassandra listened intently to whatever story he was telling. She caught Yaroslav watching, and instead of looking away, held his gaze. There was something in that moment, something unspoken but undeniable. As Theo climbed onto a carved horse, Cassandra stepped beside Yaroslav. "You're staring." He didn't look away. "Maybe." She tilted her chin slightly. "Do you like what you see?" The way she said it with quiet confidence, with a challenge, made his pulse quicken. He turned to fully face her, his voice lower than before. "Yeah, I do." For the first time, she looked slightly caught off guard. But then her lips curved, and before she could say anything else, the carousel started moving, forcing her to step back. The day passed in a blur of laughter, of Theo dragging them from one game booth to the next, of Cassandra somehow managing to win a stuffed bear twice the size of Theo just to prove she could. As the sun dipped lower, they found themselves sitting on a wooden bench, Theo resting against Yaroslav's side, his energy finally running low. Cassandra leaned back, stretching her legs out in front of her. "This was nice," she said, her voice softer than before. Yaroslav nodded, his arm resting along the back of the bench, the tips of his fingers grazing her shoulder. "It was." She turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "What happens now?" He exhaled, glancing at Theo, at the way his son trusted Cassandra, the way she had so effortlessly become part of their lives. He looked back at her. "I don't know." Cassandra reached for his hand then, threading her fingers through his. "I think we'll figure it out." Yaroslav tightened his grip slightly, his heart pounding harder than it should. Yeah, he thought they just might. Yaroslav had never been a man who overthought things. He worked hard, raised his son, and did what needed to be done. But as he stood in Cassandra's penthouse for the first time, watching her pour a glass of wine with an ease that spoke of a life so far from his own, he found himself thinking too much. She turned, offering him a glass. "You look uncomfortable." He accepted it, rolling the stem between his fingers. "I don't usually end up in places like this." Her expression remained unreadable as she took a slow sip of her own drink. "Places like what?" "Penthouses that are bigger than my entire apartment building," he said, glancing around at the sleek furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a painting. She leaned against the counter watching him. "Does it bother you?" He met her gaze. "No. But it makes me wonder how I fit into all of this." A flicker of something crossed her face, something almost vulnerable. "You don't have to fit into anything, Yaroslav," he exhaled, setting his glass down. "That's not how the world works." She placed her own glass beside his, stepping closer. "Then we make it work however we want." His pulse tightened as she stopped just short of him, her presence drawing him in like a force he didn't fully understand but couldn't resist. He had spent weeks pretending that this thing between them was just a passing moment, a result of circumstance. But standing here in her space, there was no pretending. Yaroslav's voice was quieter now. "And if it doesn't?" Cassandra's lips curved slightly, not in amusement but in certainty. "Then we figure it out." Something inside him gave in then, something he had been holding back for too long. He reached for her, his hand settling at her waist, pulling her closer. She didn't resist. If anything, she leaned into him, her fingers pressing lightly against his chest. The air between them shifted, thick with something unspoken but undeniable. Then, a knock at the door shattered the moment. Cassandra sighed, stepping back. "I wasn't expecting anyone." Yaroslav dragged a hand through his hair as she moved to answer it. The moment the door swung open, he recognized the man standing on the other side. Dark suit, sharp features, the kind of presence that demanded attention. Nathan Carter. Yaroslav had seen his face in magazines, heard his name in passing. A high-powered investor with a reputation for always getting what he wanted. Cassandra's voice was polite but firm. "Nathan, what are you doing here?" Nathan's gaze flicked past her, landing on Yaroslav. His expression barely shifted, but there was something calculating in his eyes. "I could ask the same about him." Yaroslav crossed his arms, refusing to be intimidated. Cassandra didn't hesitate. "This isn't your concern." Nathan stepped further in, ignoring her protest. "It is when my business partner starts making decisions that could cost her everything." Yaroslav's jaw tightened. "Is there a point to this?" Nathan's attention shifted fully to him now. "You think this is some kind of fairy tale? That you can step into her world without consequences?" Cassandra's voice sharpened. "That's enough." Nathan didn't look at her. "You don't belong here," he said to Yaroslav. "And you know it." Yaroslav felt the weight of the words settle, not because they were unexpected, but because they echoed the doubts he had been trying to ignore. But then Cassandra stepped between them, her posture unyielding. "You have no right to tell me who belongs in my life." Nathan exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "This isn't personal, Cassandra, it's business, and you know as well as I do that perception matters." She didn't waver. "Then maybe I don't care about perception anymore." Nathan studied her for a long moment before finally stepping back. "Just don't say I didn't warn you." Without another word, he turned and left, leaving silence in his wake. Cassandra turned back to Yaroslav, something unreadable in her expression. "Don't let him get inside your head." He let out a slow breath, running a hand over his jaw. "He's not wrong," she frowned. "Yaroslav," he shook his head. "I don't want to be the reason you lose something important." Her voice softened, but there was no hesitation in it. "You're not." He wanted to believe her, he really did. But doubt was a heavy thing, and right now it was pressing down on him harder than ever. Cassandra stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest. "You said you'd figure this out with me." He looked down at her, at the way she was asking him to trust what they had, and for the first time in a long time, Yaroslav decided to take a risk. He covered her hand with his own. "Then let's figure it out." Cassandra's lips parted slightly, surprise flickering across her face before something warmer, softer, replaced it. And just like that, whatever had been holding them back no longer mattered. Yaroslav stood on the balcony of Cassandra's penthouse, the city lights stretching endlessly before him. The weight of Nathan Carter's words still lingered, but they no longer held the same power. Cassandra had made her choice, and for the first time, Yaroslav allowed himself to believe in it. Inside, Cassandra moved through the kitchen, her movements unhurried. The tension from earlier had faded, replaced by something quieter, something steady. She placed a plate of food on the counter and glanced up at him. "You're thinking too much again," she said. Yaroslav exhaled and stepped inside, leaning against the counter. "I guess I'm not used to things working out." Cassandra met his gaze, something knowing in her expression. "Maybe it's time you let yourself have something good." He studied her for a moment before nodding. "Maybe." The next few weeks passed in a blur of long workdays and stolen moments. Yaroslav had expected Cassandra's world to be rigid, full of rules and expectations, but with her, it never felt that way. She made space for him, for Theo, for something that neither of them had planned for but both had chosen. One evening, after Theo had fallen asleep on Cassandra's couch, Yaroslav found himself watching her as she tucked a blanket around his son. She straightened, catching his gaze. "You're staring again." Yaroslav stepped closer, resting a hand against the back of the couch. "You make it too easy." Cassandra let out a soft laugh before her expression turned more serious. "I never thought I'd want this." He tilted his head slightly. "Want what?" She gestured between them, between the life they were slowly building. "Something real, something that isn't just about business and control." Yaroslav reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You have it now." She squeezed his hand slightly. "And I don't plan on letting it go." Yaroslav wasn't sure when it happened, when something temporary became something permanent. But one evening, as they stood on the rooftop of the building they had spent months working on, he realized there was no longer any doubt. Cassandra leaned against the railing, the wind tugging at her hair. "You know, if someone had told me a few months ago that I'd be here with you, I wouldn't have believed them." Yaroslav slid a small velvet box from his pocket, his pulse steady as he turned it over in his palm. "And if I told you this was only the beginning?" She turned, her brows pulling together slightly before her gaze dropped to his hand. Yaroslav took a step closer, flipping the box open to reveal the ring inside. The city lights reflected in the diamond, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at her. "I never thought I'd have this," he said, his voice steady, "but I know I don't want a life without you in it." Cassandra's lips parted slightly, and for the first time since he had met her, she looked truly surprised. Yaroslav held her gaze as he continued. "Marry me." She didn't hesitate. "Yes." The word was barely out before Yaroslav pulled her into him, his arm wrapping around her waist as he kissed her. The city blurred around them. The only thing that mattered was the woman in his arms and the life they were about to build together. Weeks later, in a quiet ceremony surrounded by the people who mattered most, Cassandra Jameson became Cassandra Jensen. As she stood in front of him, her hand in his, Yaroslav knew one thing for certain. Some things weren't planned, some things weren't expected. But some things were meant to be.